Emma Starweaver stood at the edge of the dragon caves and looked out across the green forests of Ethermoor. The ancient trees stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction, their leaves glowing with the soft bioluminescence that had evolved over thousands of years. She was different from the other elves. While her sisters spent their time perfecting their archery and practicing the ancient magic of their people, Emma spent her time in the Forbidden Library reading books about the before times. These were the times when humans and elves had walked the same worlds together before the Great Separation. Her father had warned her many times to stop reading those old texts. He said that dwelling on human knowledge would make her weak, that the elven ways were superior and always had been. But Emma could not ignore what she felt deep in her soul. There was something in the ancient human books that called to her, something that felt like truth. The old text spoke of innovation and change, of learning from mistakes and growing stronger through understanding different perspectives. These ideas fascinated her in ways that pure magic and traditional combat never could. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the mountains when Emma heard the sound. It started as a low rumble in the distance, almost like thunder, but she knew better. She had lived her entire life near the dragon caves, and she recognized that sound. It was not thunder. It was engines. Many of them. The alien ships were coming. Emma had known this day would arrive eventually. The scouts had reported strange readings in the upper atmosphere for weeks. The Elven Council had debated what to do, but they had no real plan. The Vorthans were a conquering species known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology and their complete lack of mercy. They had conquered over 300 worlds in the last century alone. No planet had ever successfully defended itself against them. The Elven leaders had begun discussing surrender, wondering if they could negotiate some kind of peace that would allow their people to survive. But Emma was not ready to surrender. She thought of the ancient human texts and remembered something that had stuck with her. A quote from someone called Winston Churchill. It said something about never giving up, even when the odds seemed impossible. She believed that the dragons might be the key to their survival. Nobody else seemed to understand what the dragons were truly capable of. She made her way down into the caves. The path was steep and winding, carved into the rock by thousands of years of dragon claws. The air grew warmer as she descended deeper into the earth. The walls began to glow with a soft blue light that seemed to come from the crystals embedded in the stone itself. These crystals had grown in the caves for millions of years, absorbing the natural magic of the planet. They were one of the most beautiful sights Emma had ever seen. At the bottom of the great cavern, 3 dragons lay sleeping on beds of these glowing crystals. Emma had come here so many times in her life that the dragons never showed fear at her approach. Arya, the oldest dragon, opened her eyes first. Her scales were silver like moonlight, and her eyes held intelligence that went beyond any animal that Emma knew about. She had raised Arya from an egg, had watched her grow from a tiny creature no bigger than a house cat into this magnificent being that was now larger than 10 human buildings stacked together. Beside Arya lay Sage, a dragon with scales of deep emerald green. Sage was younger than Arya by about 50 years, which was still ancient by human standards but young for a dragon. She was sleeker and faster than Arya, built more for agility and speed rather than pure strength. The third dragon was Ember, the smallest of the 3 but perhaps the most fierce. Her scales burned with colors of bronze and gold and copper, and she had a temperament that matched her appearance. Where Arya was wise and Sage was graceful, Ember was passionate and hungry for battle. Emma walked directly to Arya and placed her small hand on the dragon's snout. The scales were warm and smooth, not rough as most people seem to think. The dragon's eyes focused on Emma, and something passed between them that was beyond words or simple understanding. Emma had developed a connection with these dragons that went deeper than anything she had experienced before. It was as if their minds could touch each other across the space between them. She began to show Arya what she had seen in the sky. The ships, the Vorthan vessels descending through the atmosphere like angry wasps. She showed her the fear that the other elves felt, the sense that their world was about to be conquered. She showed her the weapons that the Vorthans would use, the plasma fire and the energy beams, and she showed her the choice that Arya had to make. They could hide in the caves and hope for the best, or they could fight. Arya raised her massive head and roared. The sound echoed through the entire cavern system, causing loose rocks to tumble from the ceiling. Sage and Ember were awake instantly, their eyes sharp and alert. The silver dragon sent her thoughts to her companions. and Emma felt the connection spreading. The dragons understood. They had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. They had been born for this. Emma spent the next hour preparing the dragons. She did not need saddles or reins like the old human text described. The dragons would not accept such things. Instead, she simply guided them with her mind and her will, the connection they shared running deep like roots into the earth. She told them to be careful, to avoid the heaviest fire, to use their speed and their magic to outmaneuver the enemy technology. She told them that they were not mere beasts but warriors, partners in battle, family. When they emerged from the caves, the sky was already filled with fire. The Vorthon ships had begun their assault on the capital city. Blue plasma blasts lit up the morning like artificial lightning, striking buildings and trees and anything that stood in their way. The elven defenders had taken positions on the city walls, trying to redirect the energy blasts with their magic, but it was not working well. Magic could defend against magic, but against pure technological force it was not always effective. The three dragons rose into the air, and for a moment, everything stopped. The Vorthons did not seem to notice them at first. Their sensors were looking for projectiles and energy weapons, for the kind of threats that they understood and could predict. They were not looking for ancient magical creatures that could exist partially outside of normal space and time. They were not prepared for something that their advanced technology could not fully predict or counter. Emma rode on Arya's back, her hands gripping the warm scales, her mind fully connected with the dragon's consciousness. She could feel the power flowing through Arya's ancient body. This dragon had seen centuries pass. She had watched empires rise and fall. She had faced enemies that the Vorthons had never even heard of. And now she was ready to face this new threat. The first Vorthon fighter pilot saw the dragons and laughed. His instruments showed 3 large flying objects approaching at high speed. He locked his weapon systems onto the largest one and fired. The energy blast shot across the sky like a beam of pure destruction, designed to cut through any known material. It was supposed to be unstoppable. Arya twisted her body in a way that should have been impossible for something so large. The blast missed her by inches and she banked hard to the left. Emma felt the G-forces trying to tear her away from the dragon's back, but she held tight through sheer force of will and the mental connection that bound them together. The pilot fired again, this time from a different angle. Once more, Arya moved with impossible grace as if she could see the attack before it was launched. Then it was time to attack. Arya opened her mouth and released a column of dragon fire that burned with colors that human scientists could not have named. It was fire that existed partially in the magical realm and partially in the physical realm. It was ancient and powerful and utterly devastating. The Vorthon fighter simply ceased to exist. It did not explode or crash or gradually break apart. It simply vanished, reduced to atoms and then to something less than atoms. The other Vorthon pilots suddenly realized their mistake. They tried to regroup and form a proper defense pattern, but by then it was too late. Sage moved through their ranks like a dancer, her emerald scales catching the light of the explosions. Every Vorthon weapon that fired at her either missed or failed to do any real damage. Ember, small and fierce, tore through their defensive formation like a hurricane, her bronze wings leaving trails of flame that hung in the air like burning brushstrokes. She was fearless and wild, exactly the opposite of the calm and strategic approach that Arya preferred. Within minutes, the Vorthon fighters had been completely eliminated. They had lost dozens of ships trying to fight 3 dragons that they did not understand and could not defeat. Now the larger battleships were beginning to take notice. Emma could feel the shift in the air as massive weapons systems locked onto their position. She guided Arya toward the main Vorthon command ship. The dragon descended through the atmosphere, moving faster and faster, building momentum. The command ship tried to escape, but there was nowhere to go. Emma and her dragon were united in purpose, and nothing could stand in their way. The ancient fire burned again, and the command ship's shields flared and then shattered. The vessel itself began to glow red from the heat, and then it exploded in a display of destruction that... The 3 dragons landed in the central square of the capital city, as the sun reached its highest point in the sky. Emma climbed down from Arya's back, and her feet touched the ancient stone that had been carved thousands of years ago by her ancestors. Around her, the elves began to emerge from the buildings and shelters where they had hidden. They moved slowly at first, unsure if the danger had truly passed. But as they saw the dragons sitting peacefully in the square, their fear gradually transformed into wonder. Emma's father was among the first to approach her. He was an old elf by the standards of their people, with silver hair and eyes that held the weight of many centuries. For a long moment he simply looked at his daughter without saying anything. Then he walked forward and embraced her, something he had not done since she was a child. Around them, other elves began to gather, forming a crowd that grew larger and larger. The Elven Council emerged from the Great Temple, led by Council Leader Alistair. He was an ancient being who had lived for over 3,000 years and was considered the wisest of their people. His robes were white and embroidered with symbols that represented the oldest magic of the elven race. When he saw Emma standing beside the three dragons, his expression changed from fear to something else. It might have been surprise, or it might have been the beginning of understanding. Alistair approached Emma slowly, his walking staff tapping against the stone with each step. Up close, Emma could see that the old elf was studying her carefully, looking at her with new eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. He asked Emma how she had known that the dragons could do this. He asked her how she had understood that ancient creatures of magic could defeat the technology of an alien species. Emma hesitated before answering. She knew this was the moment that would determine her future, and the future of her entire world. She could lie and say that she had simply guessed, that she had gotten lucky, or she could tell the truth about everything. She looked at the old elf and made her choice. She told him about the forbidden books, about the ancient human texts that she had been studying in secret, about how humans had taught her people to think differently and to see problems from new angles. Some of the elves around them began to mutter disapprovingly, but Alistair held up his hand for silence. The council leader studied Emma for a long moment, and then something unexpected happened. He smiled. He told Emma that she had done what none of them had thought possible. He told her that she had saved their world not through tradition alone, but through innovation and understanding. He told her that the ancient human texts might not be forbidden anymore. Over the next few days, Emma's life changed completely. The other elves began to look at her differently. Where they had once seen a young elf who wasted her time with strange books, they now saw a warrior who had single-handedly saved their entire civilization. Young elves began to seek her out, asking her to teach them what she knew about the dragons and about the human knowledge that had proved so valuable. But Emma was thinking bigger than just teaching a few young warriors. She was thinking about the future of her entire species. She spent hours in the dragon caves with Arya, Sage, and Ember, and through their connection she began to understand things that no other elf had ever known. The dragons showed her memories of ancient battles and ancient strategies. They showed her how magic and strategy could work together to create something more powerful than either alone. She brought these ideas to Alistair, and to her surprise, the old council leader listened to every word. She proposed that they establish a new academy, a place where young elves could learn not just the traditional magic and archery that had always defined their culture, but also new ways of thinking and fighting. She proposed that the dragons could teach them, that Arya, Sage, and Ember could show them how to work with magic in new and creative ways. Alistair brought her proposal to the full council, and after much debate, they agreed. Emma was given the authority to establish what would be called the Dragon Rider Academy. It would be the first of its kind among the elves. The location would be in the mountains near the dragon caves, a place where young warriors could train alongside the ancient creatures and learn to form the kind of mental connections that Emma had developed with the three dragons. The construction of the academy began immediately. Elves who had previously spent their time maintaining the traditional temples and libraries were now brought in to help build training grounds and barracks. Resources that had been saved for defense were now directed toward building a new future. The old fear and resignation that had gripped the elves before the fourth-hand attack had been replaced with a sense of possibility and hope. Emma spent every day during the construction working with the young elves who had volunteered to be the first students of the Dragon Rider Academy. There were about 50 of them in total, ranging in age from young adults to elves who had lived for several hundred years. They all shared a common desire to learn something new, to push the boundaries of what elves had traditionally been able to do. The training was difficult and often frustrating. Many of the young elves had spent their entire lives perfecting the traditional elven arts, and now they had to unlearn some of those lessons and think in completely different ways. Emma taught them about human warfare strategy and about how to approach problems from multiple angles. She taught them about the importance of understanding your enemy, and about the value of adaptation and change. But the most important part of the training was the connection with the dragons. One by one, the young elves were brought to the caves to meet Arya, Sage, and Ember. Not all of them formed strong connections with the dragons. Some were too rigid in their thinking, too attached to the old ways to truly open their minds to something new. But others showed incredible promise. They could feel the dragons reaching out to them mentally, and they could return that connection with their own minds and hearts. A young elf named Catherine was among the first to show real progress. She was only about 100 years old, still relatively young by elven standards, and she had always felt trapped by the traditional expectations of her society. When she was brought to meet Sage, something magical happened immediately. The Emerald Dragon seemed to recognize something in Catherine that resonated with her own spirit. They formed a bond so strong that within a few weeks, Catherine was riding on Sage's back and fighting alongside Emma in training exercises. Another young elf named Grace showed an incredible gift for understanding the technical aspects of combining magic with the physical abilities of the dragons. She spent hours in the library studying the ancient texts, learning about how human technology had once interfaced with elven magic in the before times. She began to develop new theories about how the elves could advance their own technology while maintaining the magical traditions that had always defined their culture. As months passed, the Dragon Rider Academy began to take real shape. The first group of graduate Dragons Riders completed their training, and they were presented to the people of Ethermoor in a grand ceremony. Emma felt a deep sense of pride as she watched these young elves ride their dragon partners in formations through the sky above the capital city. It was a sight that no one had ever seen before in the history of their world. But Emma knew that this was just the beginning. She had received reports from scouts that other alien species were taking notice of what had happened. The Vorthons had sent messages warning their allies about the dragons of Ethermoor. Some of these alien species were curious about the elves and wanted to establish trade relations. Others saw the dragons as a threat and were beginning to make plans to deal with them. Emma called another meeting with Alistair and the council. She told them that the world was changing, and the elves needed to be prepared for a future that would be very different from their past. She suggested that they reach out to other worlds and other species, that they offer their knowledge and their dragon riders in exchange for learning about the greater galaxy. She suggested that the elves could become not just defenders of their own world, but allies and partners to other species who valued innovation and the willingness to change. The council was divided on this proposal, but Alistair supported Emma. He said that the young warrior had already proven that she understood something important about the nature of progress and growth. He said that the elves should embrace this new era with open hearts and minds, and slowly the other council members began to agree. The future of Ethermoor was about to change in ways that none of them could have predicted. 6 months after the establishment of the Dragon Rider Academy, the first alien delegation arrived on Ethermoor. They came not in warships but in a sleek diplomatic vessel that landed smoothly in the designated landing zone outside the capital city. Emma was among the greeting party that went to meet them, standing beside Alistair and several other council members. The aliens who emerged from the vessel were unlike anything Emma had ever seen before. They were tall and slender, with skin that shimmered between blue and purple depending on how the light hit them. Their leader introduced himself as Ambassador Velthar of the Starborn Collective. He told the elves that his people had heard about the dragons and wanted to establish a peaceful relationship with them. He said that the Starborn Collective valued innovation and progress, much like what the elves had shown when they defeated the Vorthons. Alistair invited Ambassador Velthar and his delegation to stay in the capital city for a formal dinner, where they could discuss potential trade agreements and alliances. Emma found herself sitting across from the ambassador at the great feast table, and she began to have a conversation that would change her understanding of the galaxy in fundamental ways. Velthar told her about the history of the galaxy and the many different civilizations that had risen and fallen over millions of years. He told her about the various wars that had been fought and the different technologies that different species had developed. He told her about the Vorthans and how they had become obsessed with military power at the expense of everything else. He said that many species in the galaxy were growing tired of constant conflict and were beginning to seek other ways of organizing their societies. Emma asked Velthar what the Starborn Collective wanted in exchange. for a trade relationship. The ambassador smiled and told her that they wanted knowledge. They wanted to understand how the elves had managed to combine ancient magic with the kind of innovative thinking that was usually only found in younger species. He said that many of the older civilizations had become stagnant, so attached to their traditions that they could no longer grow or adapt. This conversation sparked an idea in Emma's mind. She spoke with Alistair after the dinner, suggesting that they invite young beings from other species to study at the Dragon Rider Academy. She proposed that the academy could become not just a school for elves, but a place where different species could come together to learn and share their knowledge and their perspectives. Alistair was intrigued by this idea, but he warned Emma that not all of the council would support such a radical change. He was right. When Emma presented the proposal to the full council, there was significant opposition. Some of the older elves felt that allowing aliens to study at their most sacred academy would be a betrayal of their traditions. They argued that the dragons were sacred beings that should only bond with elves. They said that Emma was moving too fast and taking too many risks with their culture and their heritage, but Emma stood firm in her conviction. She told the council that the elves had always been a proud people, and that pride did not have to mean isolation. She told them that the greatest civilizations in history had always been those that were willing to learn from others and to adapt their ways of thinking. She reminded them that they themselves had learned from human knowledge to defeat the Vorthons. She asked them why it would be wrong to extend that same courtesy to other species. In the end, Alistair cast the deciding vote in Emma's favor. The Dragon Rider Academy would accept a limited number of foreign students, selected carefully to ensure that they were genuinely committed to learning and growth. The first group included a young starborn named Lyris, a Kethian warrior named Tora who had 4 arms and stood nearly 8 feet tall, and a small furry alien named Pip who came from a species called the Fellerins. The integration of these foreign students into the academy caused quite a bit of tension among the young elves. Some of them welcomed the opportunity to learn from beings who had different perspectives and different ways of understanding the world. Others resented the presence of aliens and saw it as a betrayal of elven traditions. Emma found herself spending much of her time mediating conflicts and helping the students understand why this new approach was valuable. Catherine, the young elf who had bonded with Sage, became an unexpected ally. She actively befriended the foreign students and showed them around the academy, helping them understand elven culture, while also encouraging them to share their own perspectives and knowledge. Through Catherine's efforts, walls began to break down between the different species. The young elves began to see that the foreign students were not so different from them after all. They all shared a desire to learn and grow and to become something more than they had been before. Tora, the Kethian warrior, became particularly close friends with a young elf named Marcus. Tora had been trained in a form of combat that used all 4 of his arms in coordinated attacks, creating patterns and movements that no other species could easily replicate. Marcus asked Tora to teach him some of the basic principles of this style, and through their training together, something remarkable happened. They began to develop a new fighting style that combined Kethian techniques with elven magical abilities. Emma watched from a distance as this new style emerged from the collaboration between the 2 young warriors. She realized that this was exactly what she had hoped would happen. By bringing different species together, they were not diluting their own traditions. Instead, they were creating new traditions that took the best from every culture and combined them into something stronger and more effective. Several weeks into the foreign students' time at the academy, Lyris the Starborn came to Emma with an important piece of information. She said that there were rumors among the Starborn collective about a dangerous species called the Krell that had been spotted moving through this region of space. The Krell were known as mercenaries and raiders, willing to work for any client who paid them enough. Lyris said that there was concern that the Vorthons might hire the Krell to return to Ethermore and attempt to conquer the planet once again, this time with better preparation and more resources. Emma immediately brought this information to Alistair and the council. The response was mixed. Some council members wanted to begin military preparations and defensive construction. Others thought that the rumors were just fear-mongering and that there was no real threat. Alistair suggested that they prepare for both possibilities, strengthening their defenses while also continuing with their plans for expansion and development. Emma used this uncertain time as an opportunity to accelerate the training of the Dragon Riders. She pushed them harder than she had pushed them before, teaching them new tactics and strategies that would help them respond effectively if another attack came. She worked with Arya, Sage, and Ember to develop new defensive patterns and new ways of coordinating their attacks in the air. But she also knew that they could not rely on the dragons alone to protect them forever. She began working with Grace, the young elf who had shown such talent for combining magic with technical knowledge. Grace had been studying the ancient human texts and had developed some revolutionary ideas about how ancient technology could be adapted to work with elven magic. Together, they began to work on a project that would combine dragon fire with magical amplification systems, creating something that would be even more powerful than the dragons alone. This project had to be kept secret from some of the more conservative members of the council, who might have seen it as another betrayal of traditional ways. Emma and Grace worked late into the nights in a hidden laboratory beneath the academy, carefully crafting devices that would allow them to magnify and direct magical energy with incredible precision and power. As weeks turned into months, the rumors about the Krell continued to spread. The foreign students at the academy began to hear reports from their own peoples about increased Krell activity in nearby systems. Tension grew throughout the capital city as elves prepared for a conflict that might or might not come. Emma found herself torn between her responsibility to prepare her people for potential war and her desire to continue building a peaceful future based on learning and cooperation. She spent a long night sitting beside Arya in the dragon caves, and through their mental connection, she asked the ancient dragon for wisdom. Arya showed her images of many battles across many centuries. She showed her victories and defeats and the ways that different strategies and different approaches had shaped the outcome of conflicts. And then Arya showed her something else. The dragon showed Emma a vision of the future, where dragons and elves and other species worked together not just in war, but in creating something beautiful and enduring. It was a vision that gave Emma hope even as the shadows of conflict began to gather around them. The warning came in the middle of a clear night when the twin moons of Ethermore were both high in the sky. A scout ship detected a massive fleet entering the system, moving toward the planet at incredible speed. The alarm bells rang out across the capital city, and Emma woke instantly in her quarters. She did not need anyone to tell her what was happening. She immediately began moving toward the dragon caves, knowing that there was no time to waste. As she ran through the streets, she could see people rushing in all directions, some seeking safety and others taking their positions in the defense force that had been organized since the first attack. Emma found Catherine waiting for her at the entrance to the caves, already fully armed and ready for battle. Tora the Keithian was there as well, and Marcus, the young elf who had been training with him. They had both heard the alarm bells and knew that their friends would be heading to the caves. Emma did not question their presence. She simply nodded at them and headed deeper into the cavern. Arya, Sage, and Ember were already awake, and she could feel their awareness spreading through the magical connection they all shared. The three dragons knew what was coming, just as Emma did. This was not another routine training exercise. This was real. Laris, the starborn student, suddenly appeared at the cave entrance. She was breathing heavily as if she had been running at full speed. She told Emma that she had received an emergency transmission from the Starborn Collective. The Vorthons had indeed hired the Krell, and they had provided the mercenary fleet with additional weapons and strategies designed specifically to counter dragons. This attack was going to be far more dangerous than the first one. Emma felt her stomach tighten, but she did not let fear control her actions. She climbed onto Arya's back and extended her hand to Catherine, pulling her up as well. Tora and Marcus would need to use different transportation, since they were not yet bonded with dragons. Emma quickly provided them with the coordinates for the academy, where the other dragon riders and armed warriors had already begun assembling. The four dragons took flight into the night. Besides Arya, Sage, and Ember, there was now a fourth dragon named Storm, a younger dragon who had only recently bonded with Catherine. The black dragon was smaller than the others, but incredibly fast and agile. Together, they flew toward the upper atmosphere where the invading fleet was approaching. What Emma saw when she reached the upper atmosphere made her breath catch in her throat. The Krell fleet was enormous. There must have been at least 200 warships, more than 4 times the number of vessels that the Vorthons had brought in their first attack. These ships had a different design than the Vorthon vessels. They looked more like predators, with sharp angles and weapon systems protruding from every surface. The Krell did not hesitate. The moment they detected the dragons, they opened fire with everything they had. But this time, their weapons were different too. Instead of simple energy blasts, they fired clusters of small projectiles designed to confuse and overwhelm the dragon's defenses. They also used some kind of magical dampening field, something that the Vorthons had not possessed. Emma could feel the way it weakened her mental connection with Arya, making it harder for them to coordinate their movements. Arya released her dragon fire, but it did not burn as bright or as far as it had during the first battle. The magical field was interfering with her ability to channel her power fully. Sage and Ember tried different approaches, attempting to dive through the enemy formation and attack from close range, but they were met with concentrated fire from multiple ships at once. Emma realized that their traditional approach was not going to work this time. She reached out through the mental connection to Catherine and told her what she was thinking. Together, they guided their dragons into a new formation, working in tandem with each other rather than fighting independently. As Arya attacked from one direction, Sage would sweep in from another angle, and they would coordinate their fire in a pattern that forced the enemy ships to spread their defensive fire thinner and thinner. It was working, but not fast enough. For every Krell ship that was destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Emma suddenly remembered the device that she and Grace had been developing in secret. She sent an urgent message to the Academy, asking Grace to activate the prototype. Below on the ground, in the hidden laboratory beneath the Academy, Grace received the message and did not hesitate. She had finished the prototype just a few days ago, though she had not yet had a chance to fully test it. The device was a large structure that looked like a combination of ancient technology and modern magical apparatus, with crystals and metal components working together in ways that should not have been possible. Grace activated the device, and immediately the magical dampening field that the Krell had created began to weaken. The system worked by using the natural magical energy of Ethermore itself and magnifying it through the ancient technology, creating a counterfield that neutralized the enemy's disruption. Emma felt the connection with Arya strengthen immediately as the dampening field faded. The dragon's power returned to its full strength, and suddenly the tide of battle began to turn. The 3 dragons coordinated their attacks with stunning precision, their dragon fire burning with renewed intensity and reaching farther than before. But the Krell were not finished. They launched a new weapon, something that looked like massive crystalline structures that released a searing white light. These weapons were designed to specifically target magical creatures, disrupting their ability to use magic entirely. One of them struck Sage, and Emma felt the emerald dragon cry out in pain through the mental connection. Catherine immediately guided Storm in close to protect Sage, using the smaller black dragon's speed to weave through the incoming fire. Marcus, watching from below, suddenly made a decision. He took a fighter jet that the elves had salvaged from the ancient human research stations and piloted it up into the atmosphere, joining Catherine and Storm in defending Sage. This was the moment that Emma realized something crucial. The old way of thinking, relying entirely on dragons, was not going to be enough. They needed to combine the dragons with technology, just as they had combined ancient human knowledge with elven traditions. She sent out a new command to the Academy, and within minutes more fighter jets began launching into the sky. The combination of dragons and technology proved devastating. The fighter jets could target the Krell ships with precision, while the dragons could destroy their defensive systems. It was a coordinated assault that the Krell had not been prepared for. They had studied dragons and had weapons designed to fight them, but they had not anticipated that the dragons would fight alongside small mechanical craft, piloted by beings who understood both technological warfare and magical combat. Slowly, the tide continued to turn in the elves' favor. The Krell began to retreat, pulling their remaining ships back into formation. But Emma did not let them escape easily. She guided Arya in a pursuit pattern that cut off their retreat route, and the other dragons and fighter jets pressed the advantage. The Krell fleet, so massive and overwhelming just moments before, was now scattered and broken. After 3 hours of intense combat, the last of the Krell ships jumped into hyperspace and disappeared from sensor range. Emma and the other dragon riders remained in position for several more hours, making sure that there was no sign of a second attack coming. Only when they were absolutely certain that the threat had passed did they begin to descend back toward the planet. As the sun began to rise over Ethermore, Emma stood in the central square of the capital city with Arya beside her. The other dragons and warriors gathered around them, victorious but exhausted. Alistair emerged from the temple where he had been coordinating the ground defense, and he walked directly to Emma. The old council leader placed his hands on Emma's shoulders and looked at her with eyes that held profound respect. He told her that she had done it again. She had saved their world not just through the strength of dragons but through wisdom and adaptation. She had shown that different ways of fighting and different approaches could work together. He told her that the elves would need to think very carefully about what kind of civilization they wanted to be going forward. 3 years passed after the defeat of the Krell fleet. The Dragon Rider Academy had become something far greater than Emma had ever imagined it could be. Students from dozens of different species now studied within its walls, learning not just how to bond with dragons but also how to work together and create new combinations of technology and magic that none of their individual species could have developed alone. Emma had become the official commander of the academy, though she often spent more time mentoring students than commanding them. Her relationship with Arya had deepened over the years, and the two had become almost like a single being, their thoughts so intertwined that it was sometimes difficult to tell where the dragon ended and the elf began. The academy had expanded dramatically. New training grounds had been built into the mountainside, creating facilities that could accommodate students and instructors from species with vastly different environmental needs. The library had been completely reorganized and expanded, with ancient human texts now displayed alongside books from dozens of other civilizations. Young scholars from all across the known galaxy came to study there, seeking knowledge about how to blend different approaches and perspectives into something new and powerful. The city of the capital had also changed. New districts had been constructed to accommodate the increasing number of visitors and students who came to Ethermore. Trade had flourished, with merchant ships arriving regularly from dozens of different planets. The elves, who had spent thousands of years in relative isolation, had suddenly become part of a larger galactic community. But not everyone was happy with these changes. There were elves who felt that their world had been corrupted by outside influence, that the introduction of alien species and foreign technology had somehow diminished their culture and their traditions. These elves formed groups that met in secret, discussing ways to try to reverse what they saw as the erosion of elven values. One evening, Emma received word that there had been an incident at one of the research facilities. Someone had sabotaged the magical amplification system that Grace had been working on to improve their defensive capabilities. The damage was significant, and it was clear that whoever had done this had intimate knowledge of how the system worked. Emma immediately went to investigate, bringing Catherine and Tara with her. When they arrived at the facility, they found Grace examining the damage with a grim expression on her face. Grace told them that she suspected it had been done by someone who knew the system very well, someone who had probably been trained in their maintenance and operation. Through investigation over the next few days, Emma discovered that the sabotage had been carried out by a group of young elves who had been influenced by the traditionalist faction. These young elves felt betrayed by what they saw as their culture being abandoned in favor of alien ways. They believed that by sabotaging the facility, they would demonstrate that the old ways were superior, and that the elves should return to their traditional methods of defense. Emma could have had them imprisoned, but instead she did something different. She asked that they be brought to her at the Dragon Rider Academy. When they arrived, she did not lecture them or punish them. Instead, she took them to meet the dragons. She showed them what Arya could do, not just in terms of combat power, but in terms of the connection between two beings from vastly different species who had learned to understand each other completely. She told them about how the dragons had lived for thousands of years and had watched civilizations rise and fall. She asked them what they thought the dragons valued most, if they thought the dragons cared about whether elves used only magic or also used technology. One of the young elves, a girl named Iris, began to weep. She realized that she had been so focused on protecting the past that she had not considered what kind of future she wanted to create. Emma told her that protecting tradition did not have to mean rejecting innovation. The two could work together, each making the other stronger. Over the following weeks, these young elves who had committed the sabotage went through a kind of transformation. Instead of returning to imprisonment, they were given the opportunity to study at the academy. Iris showed particular talent for combining ancient elven magic with the new technologies that were being developed. By the end of a year, she had become one of Grace's most valued research assistants. The attack on the facility could have driven a wedge between the progressives and traditionalists in elven society. But Emma used it as an opportunity to create dialogue and understanding. She organized public forums where both sides could present their views. She brought in historians to talk about how elven culture had always been changing and evolving, even before the arrival of the Vorthons and the emergence of the Dragon Riders. Gradually, the opposition to the academy and to the influx of foreign students began to diminish. It did not disappear entirely, but it transformed into a kind of healthy debate rather than a destructive opposition. The traditionalists asked important questions that made the progressives think carefully about what aspects of their culture truly needed to be preserved. On a warm day during the 5th year after the establishment of the Dragon Rider Academy, Alistair called together the full Elven Council and announced his decision. He told them that he was stepping down as council leader due to his advanced age. He recommended that Emma Starweaver be chosen as his successor. There was immediate uproar in the council chamber. Some elves felt that Emma was too young and too radical for such a position. Others argued that she spent too much time with aliens and not enough time with her own people. But Alistair stood firm, and he told them that Emma had proven herself time and again to be a leader who could make difficult decisions and think about the long-term future of their civilization. After a formal vote, Emma was chosen as the new council leader. The first thing she did was establish a new council structure that included not just elves but also representatives from the major allied species. This was controversial, but Emma argued that since their future was now tied to the larger galactic community, they should have voices from that community in their decision-making processes. Marcus, the young elf who had become such good friends with Tara, was chosen as one of the elven representatives on the expanded council. Catherine, who had become one of the most skilled dragon riders in the academy, took over day-to-day running of the academy training programs. Grace was appointed to lead a new department of magical technology research, with funding that allowed her to pursue projects that she had only dreamed about before. Lyris the Starborn became a permanent resident of Ethermoor and established an embassy for the Starborn Collective. She worked closely with Emma to forge trade agreements and cultural exchanges with other civilizations. The small furry alien named Pip opened a restaurant in the capital city that served food from 6 different alien species, and it became one of the most popular gathering places for students and researchers from the academy. On her first day as council leader, Emma made a journey to the dragon caves with Arya. She sat beside the ancient silver dragon, and through their mental connection, she shared her thoughts and fears about the responsibility she had taken on. Arya showed her again the vision of the future that she had seen before, the image of dragons and elves and other species working together to create something beautiful and enduring. Emma asked the dragon if Arya thought she could do this, if she could lead their people into a future that honored both their traditions and their capacity for growth and change. Arya's response came not in words but in images and emotions. Emma saw herself standing on a mountainside, looking out over a planet that was transformed but still fundamentally itself. She saw dragons in the sky working alongside technology. She saw young beings of 12 different species studying side by side, and most importantly, she saw hope. That night, Emma made a public speech to all the people of Ethermoor, speaking to them from the central square where she had stood victorious after the first battle with the Vorthons. She told them that the world had changed, that their world had changed, but she told them that this change did not have to mean the loss of who they were. Instead, it was an opportunity to become something greater, to take the best of what they had always been and combine it with new knowledge and new perspectives. She spoke about tradition and innovation working together. She spoke about the value of learning from others while remaining true to yourself. She spoke about how the elves had survived and thrived by adapting to new challenges, and that the greatest challenge they faced now was not external enemies but the challenge of remaining open-minded, while also protecting what was truly valuable about their culture. As she spoke, the 3 dragons rose into the air above the city, circling in formations that had never been seen before in the history of Ethermore. Arya, Sage, and Ember flew alongside Storm, the younger dragon who had bonded with Catherine. Together, they created patterns in the sky that represented the integration of old and new, of tradition and innovation, of magic and technology working in perfect harmony. Emma realized in that moment that her journey had not really been about defeating aliens, or establishing schools, or becoming a council leader.